Hi everyone, Dave here at East Rosebud Fly and Tackle in Billings, Montana. Part of our continued series, I'm going to show you how to tie another fly today. It's called the Montana Prince Nymph. It is a derivation of the basic Prince Nymph, which I've tied for you before. The interesting thing about this is we're using two different colored and two different sizes of wire to wrap the abdomen. We are using a 1/8 inch gold tungsten bead for weight. And this is a 2x long nymph hook. I don't really know the history of this fly, the Montana Prince. I just know it's been very popular here for several years. And I would be very curious, if we have any Midwestern or Eastern viewers, I'd be curious to see how popular purple flies are out in your area. They're very popular here. So I put on the 1/8 inch tungsten bead. Always put the small end on the hook first and leave the large end opening in the back. And I'm going to go ahead and use .020 lead wire for supplemental weight. Normal weighting is to use wire that's about the same diameter as your hook shank material. You can of course underweight or overweight. It's up to you. It depends on how heavy a fly you want. Simply put the tag end up on the back side of the hook. Hold it with your finger and wrap it just like you would thread. I'm just going to put about 8 wraps on here, although you can put more or less depending on your needs. Tungsten carbide scissors are awfully handy for cutting wire. You don't have to dull your scissors. Then we're simply going to get these tag ends and smooth them out here like so. Now I'd like to bring the head out to the wire and push it forward to help center that bead. This is 8/0 Vivus thread. You can certainly use a heavier thread, 6/0 if you like. I like Vivus thread because it's the strongest thread for its diameter outside of GSP or Kevlar, and it holds dubbing well. Unlike UTC thread, which is nylon and fairly slick, this is a polyester thread. And we are going to be using some dubbing on here. The first thing we're going to do is build a dam of thread for 2 reasons. One, to keep our lead wire tight into our bead, and secondly, to make the transition of our abdomen and our tie downs just a little smoother. So a nice tapered thread dam. I'm going to bring this all the way down to the end of the hook shank, which is right above the back of the barb. I know you've seen me do this before, but we're going to tie in a pair of brown goose buyouts for the tail. If you're going to tie a bunch of these, don't pick off a couple of dozen buyouts, because as you see, they change in diameter, width, and length as you go down the buyout. I always like to take my buyouts off next to each other. Simply pull them off with tweezers so I get as much length as possible. And we're going to back these up back to back so that the tips of the buyout, the natural curve, curves outwards. All we do is we cross these like so, and then just slide them together. Make sure that they're parallel down their entire length and that the tips are even. As typical on flies like this, we want our buyouts to be about half hook shank length. So we have our point here. We're going to spread these buyouts over the top of the hook, slightly above it and slightly to our side. One soft wrap over the top, pull it down, pull those buyouts on top and collapse them. A couple of more tight thread wraps, and then we check and see how we're doing. And then we'll go ahead and tight thread wraps over our buyouts. It's a slick material. We need tight thread wraps just about to where our thread dam started. Trim these off flush, and then we'll continue on up and smooth this out like so. Nice smooth ramp here. Alright, like I said, this is going to be a 2-wire fly. I know the commercial version that we get uses the same size wire for both colors. I like to use a step down. I like to use a brassy and a small for this size hook. For this we're going to use a gunmetal blue and brassy, and the small in red. I think what this does, the advantage of it is it really makes your primary color, your larger wire, really pop and stand out. Plus it gives you a bit of a 3-dimensional effect to the fly. It is a little more difficult to wrap. Later on I will show you how to do a copper john and a double wire copper john to show you how that looks on that. So we're just going to pull off a few inches, whoop, wrong scissors, a few inches of wire. Alright, now we're going to get the two butt ends aligned. I have not found that it makes any difference which wire is against the hook shank, but you do want to get the tips even, and you do want to wrap them in so that they are side by side on the hook shank. So we have them side by side like so. We're going to capture the tips here right behind our lead wire, and we're going to use very tight thread wraps. Keep your bobbin close and wrap this wire tightly all the way down to the base of your tails. I'd like to put an extra turn or two there, and then we'll wrap it tightly. And again, pay attention to that abdomen. You want this smooth so that the wire wraps smoothly, and we're going to bring it all the way up to behind the bead. Now bring your two wires up perpendicular, bringing them over. The most difficult part is the first wrap or two when these wires want to separate. So you may have to get your scissors tips in there and tighten them, because we want these to be close together without any gaps. As you wrap, keep your wire flat and keep it tipped slightly towards the rear of the hook so that each wrap of wire slides off the previous wrap. Keep the wire tight. Try not to get any gaps in there. If you do, simply back up a turn and wrap it again. And I hope you're able to see this on the camera with the kind of the striking effect that this has. And of course, with this wire abdomen, it naturally adds more weight to this fly so that it sinks faster. Now as you get up towards your ramp of thread and towards where your lead wire is, it's not uncommon for this wire, because it's going up a slope, to try to want to separate a little bit. And that's okay. We're going to be covering most of this with other materials. And you can see it takes a little bit of wire to do this. Continue to wrap it up. Keep it tipped back until we get right behind the bead. Alright, as before, we want 3 tight thread wraps before we break this wire off. Simply grab one of them, keep your thread taut, and helicopter it off like so. There you go. Like I say, I'm not sure how well that shows on the video, but it's a really striking contrast. Alright, now we're going to come back and we're going to dub a little bit of a thorax on this. I'm going to be using Sanyo's Fusion Dub in the Smurf color. It's a nice bright blue. Get a pinch of it here. It's a combination of mylar and some really fine materials. So it dubs fairly easily, a little easier than ice dub for me. Little dubbing wax here, and we're going to dub back from the eye, or from the bead. And if you can see, one of the reasons I picked this particular color of dubbing is because it has both blue and red highlights in it, which complement the wire body very nicely. Like all these synthetic dubs, you've got to really put some finger pressure on it. Alright, we'll see how we're doing. And we'll wrap this then back. And I hope you can see how that really kind of makes that wire pop with that red and blue dubbing on it. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to tie in our soft hackle. This is brown hen neck hackle, a whiting product. We want our hackle to be about 1.5 hook gaps in width, so we check that length. And I'm going to go ahead and use the base tie-in method that I did for the Batman. We're going to do, instead of plucking those fibers off the base, I'm just going to cut them pretty close to the hook shank. And all this does is it gives us a little better holding power when we wrap this in. So we're right at about the middle of the thorax here. We're going to wrap this so that we're right where the hackle actually begins. Pull that down a little bit and wrap a couple of tight wraps forward. Now, as I tried to show you before and didn't do a very good job at, because I'm not very good at it, but if you can fold the hackle, it wraps nice and it makes a prettier looking soft hackle on this. Make sure that you have the stem of the hackle firmly, not just the tip. Wet your fingers a little bit. Be careful, it's not a real strong stem, and we're just trying to fold the shiny or the convex side back towards the back. This takes a lot of practice, but if you can do it and do it well, it just makes wrapping that much prettier. So we're going to wrap forward towards where our thread is hanging. Try to get these hackles, fold them back. We only need a couple of wraps, and that's all. Okay, bring our thread over, bring our hackle up, that way it's assured that we're at the stem of the hackle. Get a nice tight tie down. Pull it off. Alright, next thing we're going to do is add some legs. This is the barred sexy floss, small, white. And all we're going to do is cut off one. You'll see that sexy floss is actually a flattened, it's not round, it has a flattened aspect to it. I do like to try to tie it with the flat side against the hook. It makes the rubber legs stand out better. Hold them slightly on top to your side. As you bring the thread over, the thread torque will move it down, and you can move it. Try to get it right on the side of the fly. You can adjust it. One more wrap to secure that. I made these a little long, but the length is up to you. And then we'll do the same. I don't really have them down. There we go. Then we'll do the same on my side. This time we're going to hold them a little below our side of the hook shank so that when we bring the thread over, it carries it up. Again, I like to try to have that flat side, or a flat side, against the hook shank. And one more wrap. And you can always cut these to length later if you like. And then lastly, we're going to be using a white pair of goose buyouts for the wing case. We'll bring our thread up here right behind the bead, and we'll pull off a couple of white goose buyouts. Again, the same precautions as with the tail buyouts. You want to make sure your buyouts are next to each other so that they're the same length and the same width. And these we're going to tie in delta style, like a pair of half-open scissors. If I can get them crossed. Alright. As typical, excuse me folks, we want these buyouts to be at about a 30-degree angle, crossed over the back, and to be about to the end of the abdomen. Right. Even these tips up, measure it on top. I like to try to get the cross right where I'm going to tie in. These are very slick, so you need to hold them down firmly with thumb pressure. A couple of firm wraps on them. Make sure that they're the correct length, that they're on top of the fly like you want. And a couple of more very firm thread wraps. Now when I cut things off close behind the bead, I like to use this old pair of curved iris scissors. It allows me to get right up to it. These buyouts are very slick. I see I've lost a little bit of my spread here. We'll see if we can get it back. Alright. A couple more tight thread wraps. Then we're going to whip finish this. Try to cover up with our whip finish right behind the bead, just the butts of the buyout. Keep your band of thread narrow and don't trap your legs in there. And as always, when I'm tying off a buyout like this, I like a double whip finish. You can also add head cement, of course. My leg out of the way. There we go. Cut off our thread. Alright. Not the best one I've ever tied. My buyout slipped a little bit on me on the top. I'm sure it'll still catch fish. And there you go, Montana Prince Nymph. If you've never used double wire before, try it. You can use it in different colors. It has some fascinating effects. And at least around here, it's a great fish catcher. As always, you have any comments, suggestions, criticisms, please let us know. We'll see you next time. Thanks for joining in.